They called her fortune hunter, social climber, unworthy. The Duke's family cast her out 3 days before Christmas, her engagement shattered like glass ornaments on marble floors. Delphine Ashford walked into a December snowstorm with nothing but her pride and a leather valise, leaving behind the gilded cage that had nearly destroyed her. What they didn't know was that her disappearance would haunt them far more than her presence ever had. And when they finally found her, secluded in a remote mountain cottage, transformed beyond recognition, the truth would emerge. She had never needed them at all. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're hearing this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The frost patterns on the tall windows of Thornfield Manor resembled delicate lace, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Delphine Ashford pressed her fingertips against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the pain as carriages arrived in the circular drive below. December 1887 had descended upon the Yorkshire countryside with particular cruelty, coating everything in ice that glittered like diamonds under the pale winter sun. But inside the manor, the atmosphere was far colder than any weather could account for. "Miss Ashford, your presence is required in the blue drawing room." The housekeeper's voice carried the same disapproval that had colored every interaction since Delphine's arrival 6 months prior. She was polite, proper, and utterly glacial. Delphine turned from the window, smoothing the emerald silk of her afternoon dress. At 23, she possessed a quiet beauty that often went unnoticed in crowded rooms. Chestnut hair swept into an elegant chignon, grey eyes that held more intelligence than society deemed appropriate for a woman, and a slender figure that moved with unconscious grace. She had been raised as a gentleman's daughter, though her father's sudden death 3 years ago had revealed the precarious nature of their finances. The modest country estate had been mortgaged beyond salvation, and Delphine had found herself navigating the treacherous waters between genteel poverty and social ruin. Then had come Harrison Thornfield. The Duke of Thornfield's heir was everything society demanded. Tall, impeccably dressed, educated at Eton and Oxford, heir to one of England's most ancient titles. When he had singled her out at a London ball the previous spring, she had allowed herself to believe in fairy tales. His courtship had been swift, proper, and ultimately successful. By summer's end, they were engaged, and Delphine had been transported from her tiny rented rooms in Bloomsbury to the vast splendor of Thornfield Manor. But splendor, she had learned, could be its own prison. She descended the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the polished mahogany banister. Portraits of Thornfield ancestors gazed down with haughty expressions, their eyes seeming to follow her progress and find her wanting. The blue drawing room was on the main floor, overlooking the frost-covered gardens, where topiary animals stood like silent sentinels. Inside, she found not Harrison, but his mother. The Duchess of Thornfield sat ramrod straight on a Louis XIV settee, her silver hair arranged in perfect waves, her black bombazine dress a declaration of her authority. Lady Catherine Thornfield was a force of nature, a woman who had ruled London society for 3 decades and had no intention of relinquishing that power. Beside her sat Harrison's younger sister Lavinia, a girl of 19 with sharp features and sharper ambitions. "Miss Ashford," the Duchess said, the title carrying the weight of an insult. "Do sit down. We have matters to discuss." Delphine settled into a chair opposite them, folding her hands in her lap. 6 months of living at Thornfield had taught her to brace herself for these encounters. The Duchess had never approved of her son's choice, and she had made that abundantly clear through 1,000 tiny cruelties. "Harrison will be arriving this afternoon for the Christmas festivities," the Duchess continued, not bothering with pleasantries, "along with several other guests. It has come to my attention that certain irregularities regarding your background require clarification." Delphine's heart began to pound, though she kept her expression serene. "I'm not certain what you mean, Your Grace." "Don't play coy, girl. I've had investigators looking into your family's affairs. Your father wasn't merely in financial difficulty when he died. He was a gambler who squandered his entire fortune and died in debt up to his ears. The Ashford estate, sold to pay creditors. Your mother's jewellery, paste copies. She'd sold the real pieces years before her death. You came to London with nothing, absolutely nothing, and set your cap at my son. The words struck like physical blows, each one calculated to wound. Delphine drew a slow breath, fighting to maintain her composure. My father's difficulties are a matter of record, Your Grace. I have never hidden my circumstances. Harrison knew. Harrison, Lavinia interjected with a cruel smile, knew what you chose to tell him. A charming story of misfortune and genteel poverty, not the truth of deliberate deceit and social climbing. I have deceived no one. Delphine's voice remained steady, though her hands had begun to tremble. I may not bring a fortune to this marriage, but I bring myself, my education, my character. Your character? The Duchess laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're a fortune hunter, Miss Ashford, nothing more. A pretty face and tolerable manners wrapped around calculating ambition. Did you truly believe I would allow my son to throw himself away on a penniless nobody? The room felt suddenly airless. Delphine could hear the clock on the mantelpiece ticking, marking seconds that stretched like hours. Through the window, she could see footmen preparing for the arrival of guests, hanging evergreen wreaths and holly boughs. Christmas was 3 days away, the season of joy and redemption, and she was being systematically destroyed. Harrison loves me, she said quietly, hating how desperate the words sounded. Harrison, the Duchess replied, is a romantic fool who will thank me later for saving him from a disastrous mistake. You see, Miss Ashford, I have ensured that certain information about your family has reached the right ears. By tonight, all of London will know the true extent of your father's disgrace. No respectable family will receive you. Your reputation will be in tatters. You wouldn't. But even as she said it, Delphine knew the Duchess would and had. Lavinia leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. Harrison is also expecting someone else this Christmas. Cordelia Blackwood, daughter of the Earl of Westmarch. A childhood friend, an impeccable lineage, and a dowry of £40,000. They're quite compatible. The implications hung in the air like poison. Delphine stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking. I would like to speak with Harrison directly. By all means, the Duchess said with a dismissive wave, though I suspect you'll find his ardour somewhat cooled by recent revelations. Men of his position cannot afford sentimentality, Miss Ashford. You were a pleasant diversion for a summer, nothing more. Delphine left the room with as much dignity as she could muster, but once in the corridor she pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. Her mind raced, cataloguing possibilities and finding none that offered hope. The Duchess had struck with surgical precision, attacking not just Delphine's reputation, but the very foundation of her relationship with Harrison. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach twist with bitter knowledge, was that she wasn't entirely surprised. Harrison had been distant lately, his visits to the manor growing less frequent, his letters shorter and more formal. She had attributed it to his responsibilities in London, to the demands of Parliament and estate management. But perhaps it had been something far simpler, a man realizing he had made a mistake and lacking the courage to admit it. The afternoon crept by with excruciating slowness. Delphine remained in her room, a guest chamber on the second floor that had been assigned to her with deliberate calculation. Not grand enough to suggest she was truly family, not modest enough to be insulting. Just enough to remind her daily of her ambiguous position. She heard the commotion of arrivals as dusk approached, carriage wheels on gravel, voices calling greetings, the bustle of servants managing luggage. She pictured Harrison stepping down, his handsome face lighting with smiles for his mother and sister. She pictured Cordelia Blackwood, whoever she might be, welcomed with warmth and enthusiasm. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Ashford, His Grace requests your presence in the main hall." This was it then, the moment of reckoning. She descended once more, each step feeling like a march to an execution. The main hall blazed with candlelight, the massive Christmas tree in the corner festooned with ribbons and glass ornaments, guests milled about in evening dress, champagne glasses glinting, and there, at the center of it all, stood Harrison. He was handsome, she had to admit. Golden-haired and blue-eyed, the very picture of English aristocratic perfection. But as she approached and their eyes met, she saw something there that made her blood run cold. Guilt, pity, and worst of all, relief, as if her appearance had settled some internal debate. "Delphine," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "might we speak privately?" They withdrew to his father's study, a masculine room of leather and mahogany that smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Harrison closed the door and stood with his back to it, not meeting her eyes. "I've been a coward," he began, and something in Delphine's chest went very still. "I should have spoken to you weeks ago, but I couldn't find the words." "Let me help you," she said, her voice hollow. "You've decided you made a mistake. The engagement is off." He flinched. "It's not that simple, isn't it? Your mother has made it abundantly clear that I'm unsuitable. And you, Harrison, have chosen to believe her rather than defend me. You don't understand the pressures, the expectations. I understand perfectly." She held up her hand, where his grandmother's ring caught the lamplight, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, a shackle disguised as a gift. She pulled it off and held it out. "Here, consider yourself released from any obligation." "Delphine, please." "Please what? Please accept that I'm not good enough. Please understand that my love means nothing against £40,000 and the Earl of Westmarch's approval." Her voice had risen, years of quiet acceptance finally breaking. "I will not beg, Harrison. I will not diminish myself further for a man who lacks the spine to stand up for what he claims to want." She pressed the ring into his hand and turned toward the door. Behind her she heard him say her name once more, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. If she paused, if she looked back, she might shatter completely. The hall was still filled with guests, their laughter a mockery. She swept past them, ignoring the curious stares, and climbed the stairs to her room. Her hands shook as she pulled a leather valise from the wardrobe and began throwing things into it. Dresses, books, her mother's locket, the few precious possessions she had brought to this beautiful, terrible place. Night had fallen fully by the time she finished. Through her window she could see snow beginning to fall, thick flakes that promised a heavy storm. Perfect. Let the weather match her mood. Let the world itself weep. She wrote no note, left no explanation. What was there to say that hadn't already been spoken? She simply picked up her bag, wrapped herself in her warmest cloak, and walked out of Thornfield Manor. The snow swirled around her as she trudged down the long drive, her feet already going numb in her inadequate boots. Behind her, the manor blazed with light and warmth, but she didn't look back, not once. Whatever happened next, she would face it alone, just as she always had. The village of Thornfield sat 2 miles from the manor, a picturesque cluster of stone cottages and shops that existed primarily to serve the estate. Delphine reached it just as her strength began to fail, her cloak heavy with snow, her hands so cold she could barely feel her fingers. The Golden Lion Inn stood at the village centre, its windows glowing with promise of warmth and shelter. The innkeeper's wife, a stout woman named Mrs. Bramble, took one look at Delphine's state and ushered her inside without question. "Lord have mercy, miss. You'll catch your death. Come by the fire, quickly now." Delphine sank into a chair near the hearth, her teeth chattering too violently to speak. Mrs. Bramble brought blankets, hot tea, and mercifully no questions. For that night at least, she was safe. But safety proved temporary. By morning the village was abuzz with news from the manor. Delphine heard it from her small room above the taproom, snatches of conversation that drifted up through the floorboards as patrons gathered for breakfast. "Broken off the engagement, I heard. Her Grace says the girl was a fortune hunter, came from nothing." Father died in disgrace, gambling debts everywhere, already arranged for the Blackwood girl, much more suitable. Each word was a knife, carefully placed and expertly twisted. The Duchess had wasted no time spreading her version of events, and the village, dependent as it was on Thornfield patronage, had accepted it without question. By noon, Mrs. Bramble's warmth had cooled considerably, her manner polite but distant. Delphine spent the day in her room, staring at the ceiling and trying to formulate a plan. She had perhaps £10 to her name, enough for a week's lodging and coach fare to London. But London held nothing for her, no family, no friends who wouldn't have heard the gossip, no prospects. The carefully constructed life she had built from the ruins of her father's failure had collapsed entirely. On the morning of Christmas Eve, everything became infinitely worse. She descended to the taproom to settle her bill, intending to take the afternoon coach to wherever it was going, when she found the inn crowded with familiar faces. Guests from the manor, come to the village for the traditional Christmas Eve service at the ancient Norman church across the square, and among them, impossible to miss, Harrison and Cordelia Blackwood. Delphine froze on the stairs, wanting to retreat, but unable to move. Cordelia was everything she was not, tall and striking with raven black hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from a lifetime of certainty about one's place in the world. She wore a crimson velvet riding habit that must have cost more than Delphine's entire wardrobe, and she had her hand possessively on Harrison's arm. "My goodness!" Cordelia's voice carried clearly across the taproom, cut glass and contempt. "Is that the unfortunate Miss Ashford? How awkward." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Delphine, and she felt herself examined and judged, found wanting by unanimous decree. Harrison had the grace to look uncomfortable, but he said nothing, did nothing, simply stood there like a weak-willed statue while his new paramour eviscerated his former fiancée. "You're still in the village?" Cordelia continued, her tone suggesting genuine surprise. "I would have thought you'd have scurried back to whatever hole you crawled out of by now, unless—" Her eyes widened with mock concern. "Oh dear, you haven't anywhere to go, do you? How perfectly dreadful." Lavinia Thornfield appeared at Cordelia's side, clearly delighted by the spectacle. "I did try to warn Harrison, you know," she said to Cordelia, but loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some people have a gift for spotting social climbers, but my brother has always been too tender-hearted for his own good. Thank heavens Mama intervened before any real damage was done." Delphine descended the last few steps, her head high despite the burning shame that flooded through her. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "If you'll excuse me," she said quietly, moving toward the door. "Oh, but we're all going to the Christmas service," Cordelia said brightly. "Surely you wouldn't miss such a tradition. Or perhaps you're concerned about taking communion with so many lies on your conscience." "That's quite enough, Cordelia." Harrison finally spoke, though his voice lacked any real authority. "There's no need to be cruel." "Cruel?" Cordelia laughed, a sound like silver bells laced with poison. "I'm being honest, darling. Something Miss Ashford should try sometime. Did you really think you could trap a duke's heir with a pretty face and a sob story? Did you truly believe he would choose you over someone of appropriate breeding and fortune?" The room was so quiet that Delphine could hear the fire crackling in the hearth, the wind howling outside, the rapid beating of her own humiliated heart. She looked at Harrison, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. Whatever affection she had felt, whatever romantic dreams she had cherished, they died in that moment. "You're right," she said clearly, addressing Cordelia but including the entire room. "I was never appropriate, not for this family, not for this world. I made the mistake of believing that love and character mattered more than breeding and bank accounts. I see now how profoundly wrong I was." She walked toward the door, but Lavinia stepped into her path. "Not so fast. You have something that belongs to my family, my grandmother's sapphire ring. Harrison says he returned it, but there were other pieces. A bracelet, I believe, and a brooch. Family heirlooms, not gifts for the temporary amusement of social climbers." "I have nothing that belongs to you," Delphine said, her voice shaking now despite her best efforts. "Everything I brought to Thornfield, I've taken with me. I want nothing from any of you." "Perhaps we should check her room," Cordelia suggested to Lavinia, "just to be certain. These people can be so light-fingered." The implication, the outright accusation of theft, hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Delphine felt the final shreds of her composure unraveling. Around her, the villagers and manor guests watched with avid curiosity, drinking in every moment of her destruction. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare any of you?" "Miss Ashford," Mrs. Bramble said nervously, clearly torn between defending her guest and maintaining her relationship with the manor. "Perhaps it would be best if you settled your bill and moved on. Today." "Yes," Delphine said numbly. "Yes, I'll do that." She turned back toward the stairs, intending to retrieve her valise and leave immediately. Dignity be damned. But as she moved, her vision swam, grey creeping in at the edges. She hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, hadn't slept more than a few fitful hours, and the accumulated shock and stress finally overwhelmed her body's ability to cope. She felt herself falling, heard someone cry out, and then everything went mercifully black. When she woke, she was lying on a settee in Mrs. Bramble's private parlour, a cool cloth on her forehead. The innkeeper's wife sat beside her, concern overriding her earlier wariness. "Easy now, miss. You gave us quite a fright." "How long was I unconscious?" "Just a few minutes. The doctor's been sent for—" "No!" Delphine sat up too quickly, the room spinning. "No, doctor. I just need to leave. Please, Mrs. Bramble, just let me pay what I owe and go." "In this weather? In your condition?" The older woman shook her head. "I won't have that on my conscience, whatever the manor folk think of you. You'll stay the night at least, get some food and rest. Tomorrow, if the storm's passed, you can decide what to do." Delphine wanted to argue, but she lacked the strength. She simply nodded and let herself be led back upstairs to her room. Through the window she could see that the snow had intensified, a true blizzard now that made the world beyond the glass almost invisible. Trapped. She was trapped in this village, under the same sky as her tormentors, unable to escape the scene of her humiliation. The Christmas bells began to ring, calling the faithful to service, and she wondered bitterly what she was supposed to be grateful for on this holiest of nights. The evening dragged on in isolation. Mrs. Bramble brought soup and bread, which Delphine forced herself to eat despite her churning stomach. She could hear the sounds of celebration from below. The manor party had returned after the service for drinks and holiday cheer. Their laughter drifted up, each burst a reminder of everything she had lost. Near midnight, as the revelry finally died down, Delphine made her decision. She couldn't stay here, couldn't spend Christmas Day knowing that everyone in the village knew her shame, that every sympathetic look or cold shoulder would be a fresh wound. She would leave tonight, storm or no storm. She would walk to the next village if necessary, find some way forward, even if that way led through snow and darkness. She packed her valise once more, counted her remaining money, and wrapped herself in every warm garment she possessed. Then she opened her door and crept down the servants' stairs, avoiding the main taproom. The inn's side door stood unguarded, and she slipped through it into the brutal cold of a Yorkshire blizzard on Christmas Eve. The wind nearly knocked her over, and the snow was already knee-deep. But Delphine pressed forward. She had no clear destination, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and Thornfield. Behind her, the village slowly disappeared into the white fury of the storm. Ahead lay only uncertainty. But uncertainty, she thought grimly, was better than the golden cage she had escaped. Let them think her a fool. Let them laugh at her disappearance. She would rather vanish entirely than remain where she was so clearly unwanted. The cold bit through her layers of clothing, and the path, if there even was a path, had disappeared beneath the drifts. Delphine stumbled forward anyway, driven by something beyond reason, beyond self-preservation, by sheer will and wounded pride. How long she walked through that blizzard, Delphine never knew. Time lost meaning in the whiteout, each step an act of defiance against the elements and fate itself. Her thoughts had narrowed to the most basic imperative: keep moving, keep breathing, don't stop. To stop was to surrender, and she had already surrendered too much. She didn't remember collapsing. One moment she was forcing her frozen legs through another drift, and the next she was lying in the snow, looking up at a sky she couldn't see. How easy it would be, she thought distantly, to simply close her eyes and let the cold take her. A dramatic ending to a failed romance, the kind of tragedy that made good ballads. But then she heard a sound, hoofbeats and the jingle of harness bells, impossibly close. A lantern's glow penetrated the storm, and a voice, deep and urgent, called out, "Good God, there's someone here!" Strong hands lifted her, and she felt herself being wrapped in a heavy blanket and hoisted onto a horse. The world swayed and tilted, and she surrendered to the darkness once more, this time with the faint spark of hope that perhaps she wouldn't die after all. Consciousness returned in fragments, the crackle of a fire, the softness of down pillows beneath her head, the scent of pine and wood smoke, and something medicinal, voices, hushed and concerned, discussing her condition in tones too low to make out words. When she finally opened her eyes fully, she found herself in a room she didn't recognize, rustic but comfortable, with exposed timber beams and stone walls softened by tapestries. A fire roared in a large hearth, and morning light streamed through leaded windows, revealing a landscape of pristine, snow-covered mountains. "Ah, you're awake at last." The voice came from a woman seated in a chair near the bed, a woman of perhaps 60 years, with silver hair pinned in a practical bun, and the kind of face that suggested both wisdom and humor had marked it equally. She wore a simple woolen dress and an expression of keen interest. "Welcome back to the land of the living, my dear. You gave us quite a scare." "Where am I?" Delphine's voice was hoarse, her throat raw from the cold. "Raven's Peak. My cottage, specifically. I'm Margaret Hartwell, though everyone calls me Meg. My nephew found you in the storm last night. Well, technically very early this morning. Christmas Day dawn, to be precise. Quite the gift, though I suspect you weren't intending to be anyone's Christmas surprise." Delphine struggled to sit up, and Meg immediately moved to help, adjusting pillows and handing her a cup of something warm and fragrant. "Drink. It's willow bark tea with honey. Good for fever and pain." "I need to leave," Delphine said, even as she gratefully accepted the cup. "I've imposed enough already." "You'll leave when you're well enough to do so, and not a moment before. You had mild frostbite on 3 fingers and both feet, not to mention exhaustion and fever. Another hour in that storm, and my nephew would have been hauling a corpse into my sitting room instead of an unconscious woman. So drink your tea and let yourself heal." There was no arguing with such brisk kindness. Delphine drank, and the warmth spread through her chest, loosening something that had been clenched tight since she left Thornfield. "Your nephew," she said carefully. "I should thank him." "You will, when he returns from checking the mountain paths. Dr. Benedict Sterling recently returned from several years practicing in Edinburgh. Brilliant young man, though I'm biased." Meg's eyes sparkled with affection and something else, a sharp intelligence that suggested she missed very little. "Now suppose you tell me what possessed you to walk into a Christmas Eve blizzard alone, dressed entirely inadequately and carrying the look of someone running from something far more dangerous than weather." The question was gently asked, but penetrating nonetheless. Delphine found herself, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, telling the truth. Perhaps it was Meg's forthright manner, or perhaps it was simply the relief of speaking to someone who didn't already know and judge her story. Whatever the reason, the words tumbled out. Harrison, the engagement, the Duchess's cruelty, Cordelia's public humiliation, her desperate flight. Meg listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively more severe. When Delphine finished, she sat back and folded her arms. "Well," she said flatly, "the Thornfield family are even more insufferable than I remembered, and that's saying something." "You know them?" "Of them. I was married to a gentleman once, before he died, and left me with enough money to be independent, but not enough to be interesting to society. I've lived up here in Raven's Peak for 20 years, blissfully removed from that world's petty cruelties, but I keep abreast of things." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Now listen carefully, Delphine Ashford. You've been treated abominably, but dwelling on that injustice won't help you. The question is, what do you want to do next?" "I don't know," Delphine admitted. "I have almost no money, no family, no prospects. I suppose I'll have to seek employment as a governess or companion, though without references." "Nonsense." Meg waved a dismissive hand. "You're an educated woman with intelligence and character. The world needs far more from you than teaching spoiled children their letters. What did you study? What interests you?" I read extensively. History, literature, some philosophy. I speak French and Italian. I play the piano tolerably well, but none of that is profitable or practical, you were going to say. More nonsense. My nephew runs a small medical practice here in Raven's Peak and the surrounding villages. The people here are working folk, miners, farmers, craftsmen. Many can barely read. Benedict has been looking for someone to help with record-keeping, correspondence, even teaching basic medicine to the local women. Would that interest you?" Delphine stared at her. "I have no medical training. Neither did most doctors before they apprenticed. You can learn. More importantly, you can be useful, earn your keep, and find out who you are when you're not trying to fit yourself into some aristocratic family's narrow expectations." Meg stood and moved to the window, looking out at the mountain vista. "Stay here, Delphine, at least through winter. Help Benedict with his work, read my library. It's extensive, and give yourself time to heal, not just your frostbite, your heart and pride." It was too generous, too sudden. Delphine's first instinct was to refuse, to insist she couldn't accept such charity. But another part of her, the part that had nearly frozen to death rather than remain where she wasn't wanted, recognized the offer for what it was. A lifeline. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You don't know me. I know enough, and I'm a firm believer in rescuing young women from the wreckage of other people's cruelty. Call it my personal crusade." Meg smiled, and it transformed her stern face into something warm and conspiratorial. "Besides, I like you. You walked into a blizzard rather than accept humiliation meekly. That takes spine. So what do you say?" Before Delphine could answer, the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and a man who had to duck slightly to enter. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark auburn hair curling slightly from the damp, and eyes the color of pine forests. His face was weathered from mountain sun and wind, with strong features that would never be fashionable, but were somehow compelling nonetheless. He wore practical wool and leather, a physician's bag slung over one shoulder. "The lower paths are clear," he said to Meg, then noticed Delphine was awake. His expression softened with relief. "Miss Ashford, I'm very glad to see you conscious. How are you feeling?" "Thanks to you, alive to feel anything at all," Delphine said. "I'm deeply grateful, Dr. Sterling." "Benedict, please, and no gratitude necessary. I'm just thankful we came across you when we did." He set down his bag and moved closer, his manner professionally courteous. "May I examine your hands and feet? I need to ensure the frostbite isn't worsening." As he worked, checking her fingers with gentle competence, Delphine studied him covertly. He was perhaps 30, with the kind of calm assurance that came from facing real crises regularly. His hands were warm and careful, his questions precise but kind. There was nothing of the drawing room about him, none of Harrison's aristocratic polish. Instead, he possessed a solid, earthy capability that made her feel inexplicably safe. "You're very fortunate," he said, bandaging two of her fingers. "No permanent damage, though you'll need to keep these warm and dry for the next week. And no more midnight walks in blizzards, if you please." "I'll try to resist the temptation," Delphine said, surprising herself with the hint of humor in her voice. Benedict glanced at his aunt, who nodded slightly, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Delphine. "Aunt Meg tells me you might be interested in assisting with my practice. I hope she mentioned it's not glamorous work. Long hours, difficult conditions, patients who sometimes pay in eggs and turnips rather than coin. But if you're genuinely interested, I could certainly use the help. I have no training, Delphine warned. You have literacy, intelligence, and if I may say so, the fortitude to walk through a blizzard. That qualifies you better than most. The rest you can learn if you're willing. If she was willing. Was she? To trade the gilded halls of Thornfield for a mountain cottage, to exchange society balls for medical rounds, to learn an entirely new way of existing in the world. 3 days ago, such a choice would have been unthinkable. Now it felt like the only sane option. I'm willing, she said firmly. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to help. Benedict's smile was slow but genuine, lighting his eyes with warmth. Then, welcome to Raven's Peak, Delphine. Fair warning, we take Christmas seriously up here. You're just in time for Aunt Meg's famous goose and the village gathering tonight. Consider it your introduction to your new life. As he left to prepare for evening rounds, Meg squeezed Delphine's shoulder. There now. See how easy it is to start over when you stop letting other people define your worth. Now rest a bit more, then we'll find you some proper mountain clothes. Those London dresses won't survive a week up here. Delphine lay back against the pillows, her mind whirling with the speed of the changes. 48 hours ago, she'd been preparing to marry a duke's heir. Now she was preparing to become a physician's assistant in a mountain village. It should have felt like falling, like failure. Instead, for the first time in longer than she could remember, it felt like possibility. The winter months passed with surprising swiftness. Delphine settled into the rhythm of mountain life, finding it both harsher and more genuine than anything she had known in London society. She rose at dawn to help Benedict prepare for his rounds, learning to sterilize instruments, prepare medicaments, and keep meticulous records of patient histories. In the afternoons, she studied his medical texts, absorbing information about anatomy, common ailments and treatments with the same intensity she had once devoted to French verbs and piano sonatas. But more than that, she learned to be useful in ways that mattered. She taught miners' wives how to recognize signs of infection, helped deliver babies in rough mountain cottages, sat vigil with the dying while Benedict performed emergency surgeries in conditions that would have horrified his Edinburgh professors. The people of Raven's Peak accepted her without question, caring nothing for her background and everything for her willingness to work. Meg's cottage became home. The older woman was a revelation, widely read, sharply opinionated, and possessed of a dry humor that kept even the bleakest days bearable. She had a gift for drawing people out, and under her patient questioning, Delphine found herself discussing topics she had never dared broach in polite society. Politics, women's rights, the hypocrisy of social hierarchies. The world is changing, Meg said one evening in February as they sat by the fire, knitting socks for Benedict's patients. Slowly, painfully, but changing nonetheless. Women are entering universities, writing novels, even practicing medicine in some places. You could do more than assist Benedict, you know. You could study properly, become a physician yourself. That's impossible, Delphine said automatically. Women aren't admitted to medical schools in England. Not yet. But there are schools in Edinburgh, in Switzerland. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. Meg's needles clicked rhythmically. Just something to consider. You have a gift for this work, Delphine. I see it in how the patients respond to you. Delphine set down her knitting, troubled by the sudden surge of longing Meg's words evoked. She had spent so long trying to become what others wanted, the perfect gentleman's daughter, the suitable aristocratic wife, that the idea of choosing her own path felt both thrilling and terrifying. Her relationship with Benedict deepened as well, though neither acknowledged the shift explicitly. They worked together with increasing ease, developing a wordless communication that made treating patients more efficient. He taught her to clean and stitch wounds, to identify medicinal plants, to listen for the subtle signs of respiratory distress. She organized his chaotic filing system, drafted correspondence to colleagues, and began keeping detailed case notes that he praised for their clarity. "You have a physician's mind," he told her one March afternoon as they trekked back from a difficult delivery in the Highlands. The mother had hemorrhaged badly, and only Benedict's quick intervention had saved her life. Delphine had assisted without flinching, her hands steady as she passed instruments and soothed the terrified woman. "Calm in crisis, observant, decisive, it's a rare gift." "I had a good teacher," Delphine replied, but she felt a warm flush of pride nonetheless. When had she last received genuine praise for something she had accomplished, rather than for her appearance or social graces? "I'm serious," Benedict said, stopping on the path to face her. The spring sun caught his auburn hair, turning it copper, and his eyes were intent on hers. "You've exceeded every expectation, Delphine. You've become indispensable." There was something in the way he said it, a weight of meaning that went beyond professional admiration. For a moment they stood there in the mountain air, aware of something unspoken building between them. Then Benedict cleared his throat and resumed walking, and the moment passed. But it had been there, Delphine thought as she followed him down the path, real and undeniable. And unlike her feelings for Harrison, which had been built on romantic fantasy and social pressure, this was something rooted in shared work, mutual respect, and genuine understanding. In April, everything changed. Delphine was working alone in Benedict's surgery, updating patient records, when Meg burst in with unusual agitation. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting a folded newspaper into Delphine's hands. It was a London society paper, weeks old by the time it reached Raven's Peak, but still current enough for its gossip to sting. The headline made Delphine's breath catch. "Duke's son's engagement already in trouble," she read with growing astonishment. Apparently, Harrison Thornfield and Cordelia Blackwood's betrothal was foundering spectacularly. Cordelia, it seemed, had become demanding and temperamental, her spending extravagant even by aristocratic standards. Harrison appeared miserable at social functions. The Duchess was frantically trying to keep up appearances, but rumors of discord were rampant. And there, buried in the final paragraph, was a reference to Delphine herself. "Sources close to the family suggest His Grace still pines for his former fiancée, Miss Delphine Ashford, who vanished under mysterious circumstances last Christmas. The current Duchess Thornfield is said to be most displeased by this continued attachment." "How dare they?" Delphine said quietly. "How dare they reduce me to a romantic plot point in Harrison's story? As if I've been sitting somewhere pining for him." "Have you been?" Meg asked shrewdly. "No." Delphine realized as she said it that it was absolutely true. "I haven't thought about him in months, except to be grateful I escaped. That whole world feels like a fever dream now, something that happened to a different person." "Good, because there's more news." Benedict received an invitation to present a paper at the Royal Society of Medicine's Spring Conference in London. It's a significant honor. His work on infection prevention in rural settings has attracted attention. He wants you to accompany him as his research assistant. The presentation is in 3 weeks. London. Delphine's first instinct was refusal. "I can't." "You can and will," Meg interrupted firmly. "You've been hiding in these mountains long enough. It's time to show that world and yourself exactly who Delphine Ashford has become." Over the following week, Benedict tried repeatedly to ensure Delphine was comfortable with the London trip. "If it's too difficult," he said gently, "I can manage alone. The last thing I want is to cause you pain." "You're not causing me anything," Delphine assured him. "I'm nervous, yes, but I'm also ready. I'm not the woman who fled Thornfield, Benedict. I don't want to hide anymore." As they prepared for the journey, Meg took charge of Delphine's wardrobe with characteristic practicality. "None of those insipid pastels you used to wear. You're a professional woman now, and you'll dress accordingly." The result was a traveling suit of deep sapphire wool, simply cut but elegantly tailored, with a matching jacket that emphasized her figure without restricting movement. For evening, Meg produced a gown of midnight blue silk that was startlingly sophisticated, nothing like the frilly confections young unmarried ladies were supposed to wear. I look so different, Delphine said, studying her reflection. Months of mountain life had changed her. Her face had lost its London pallor, replaced by healthy colour. Her grey eyes, once soft and uncertain, now held directness and confidence. Even her posture had changed. Shoulders back, spine straight, not from enforced deportment training, but from genuine self-assurance. "You look like yourself," Meg corrected. Finally. The journey to London took 2 days by train, and Delphine spent much of it reviewing Benedict's research notes and preparing for potential questions. They had adjoining rooms at a respectable but unfashionable hotel near the Royal Society's headquarters, and Benedict was scrupulous about propriety, always ensuring a chaperone was present when they worked together in public spaces. The conference began with a reception, and Delphine accompanied Benedict into a room full of distinguished physicians, researchers, and medical professionals. She felt the familiar flutter of social anxiety, but this time it was tempered by purpose. She wasn't here to be displayed or judged. She was here to work. Benedict introduced her to colleagues as my invaluable research assistant, Miss Ashford, whose organizational skills and keen observations have been instrumental in this work. She shook hands, discussed methodology, answered technical questions with growing confidence. These men, and a few pioneering women, cared about competence, not pedigree. Then, across the room, she saw a familiar face. Harrison Thornfield stood near the refreshment table, looking uncomfortable in his evening clothes. He was accompanying an older man, probably his father, the Duke himself, and he appeared to be engaged in stilted conversation with a group of industrialists. His gaze swept the room with obvious boredom, then stopped, widened, locked on Delphine. For a moment they simply stared at each other across the crowded space. Delphine saw shock, recognition, and something that might have been longing flash across his face. Then Benedict touched her elbow lightly, drawing her attention to someone he wanted her to meet. And when she glanced back, Harrison was making his way toward her through the crowd. "Delphine!" He reached them slightly breathless, his eyes searching her face. "Good God, it really is you. I thought when you disappeared we searched, but—" He seemed to register Benedict's presence and collected himself slightly. "I'm Harrison Thornfield. Miss Ashford and I were acquainted." "Dr. Benedict Sterling," Benedict said coolly, his posture subtly protective. "Miss Ashford is my research colleague. We're presenting on rural infection prevention protocols tomorrow." Harrison blinked, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with whatever narrative he had constructed. "You're working as a medical assistant?" "Yes," Delphine said calmly, though her heart was hammering. "I'm Dr. Sterling's assistant. We run a practice in Ravens Peak in Yorkshire. It's been extraordinarily fulfilling work." "But you—" Harrison glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Delphine, we need to talk. Privately. There's so much I need to explain." "I don't think that's appropriate," Benedict interjected quietly. "Miss Ashford has made it clear she's moved on from past associations. I'm sorry. Who are you to speak for her?" Harrison's aristocratic hauteur was emerging, the assumption that he had rights and claims that superseded any others. "Someone who values and respects her contributions," Benedict replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have colleagues to speak with." He guided Delphine away smoothly, leaving Harrison standing alone. Once they were on the other side of the room, Benedict said quietly, "I apologize if I overstepped, but you looked like you needed an escape route." "Thank you," Delphine said gratefully. "I did. I wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt to see him. Not because I want him back," she added quickly, "because I'm angry at how easily he let me go, how little he fought for what he claimed to want." "His loss," Benedict said simply. "And if I may say so, he looked absolutely wretched, which strikes me as entirely appropriate." Despite herself, Delphine smiled. Entirely appropriate indeed. But the encounter had shaken her, and Benedict seemed to sense it. For the rest of the evening he stayed close, his presence a steady anchor as she navigated conversations and deflected curious glances. When they finally returned to the hotel, he walked her to her door. "You were magnificent tonight," he said softly. "Confident, articulate, brilliant. I was proud to have you beside me." Benedict, Delphine started, then hesitated, uncertain what she wanted to say. "Thank you? I'm falling in love with you? Everything I thought I wanted 5 months ago seems meaningless compared to the life we've built?" He seemed to understand her uncertainty. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's the presentation and we want to be sharp. Whatever else happens, we'll face it together." Together. Such a simple word, but weighted with promise. Delphine watched him disappear into his own room, then entered hers, her mind whirling with the evening's revelations. She had faced Harrison Thornfield and felt nothing but anger at the past and relief about her present. And she had realized, with sudden clarity, that somewhere between learning to stitch wounds and delivering babies and discussing medical texts by Meg's fireside, she had fallen completely in love with Benedict Sterling. The question now was what to do about it. Benedict's presentation the next morning was a triumph. He spoke with passion and precision about the implementation of basic hygiene protocols in rural settings, demonstrating how simple interventions, sterilizing instruments, washing hands, isolating infectious patients, could dramatically reduce mortality rates. He cited specific cases, used detailed statistics, and credited Delphine repeatedly for her meticulous record-keeping and patient education efforts. Delphine sat in the front row, her heart swelling with pride as she watched him command the room. This was meaningful work, real contribution to human welfare, not the empty social performances she had once considered her destiny. When the audience erupted in applause and senior physicians crowded forward to congratulate Benedict, she felt a fierce joy in his success. Afterward, as they celebrated with his colleagues over lunch, a message was delivered to their table. Benedict frowned as he read it, then passed it to Delphine. It was from Harrison, requesting an audience that afternoon. "I believe I can explain much about last winter's events. Please, Delphine, give me 1 hour to tell you the truth you deserve to hear. I will be at the Claridge Hotel tea room at 3 o'clock. Come alone, if you can." "HT, you don't have to go," Benedict said immediately. "You owe him nothing." "I know," Delphine replied slowly, "but I think I need to. Not for him, but for myself. I need to close that chapter properly, face to face, so I can move forward without any lingering questions." Benedict's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then I'll accompany you and wait nearby. You shouldn't face him entirely alone." The Claridge Hotel was exactly the kind of establishment the Thornfield family favored. Opulent, exclusive, dripping with old money and older titles. Delphine entered the tea room in her simple blue traveling suit and felt the weight of disapproving stares from the assembled aristocrats taking their afternoon refreshment. But she walked with her head high, no longer caring what these people thought. Harrison sat at a corner table, looking haggard. The golden boy charm that had first attracted her had faded, leaving behind a man who appeared older than his years and deeply unhappy. He stood as she approached, his relief palpable. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would." "I nearly didn't," Delphine said, taking the seat opposite him. "You have 1 hour, Harrison. Use it wisely." He ordered tea, then sat in silence for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and urgent. "Everything that happened last Christmas was orchestrated by my mother, but I need you to understand. I was complicit through weakness, not malice. I should have fought for you, for us. Instead, I let fear and duty override what I knew was right." "Go on," Delphine said neutrally. "Mother did investigate your background, as she said. But she also fabricated information, made your father's debts sound worse than they were, spread rumors about your character that had no basis in fact. She wanted you gone, and she was willing to destroy your reputation to accomplish it. I gathered that much myself. Cordelia was part of the plan from the beginning. Mother had been corresponding with her family for months before you and I even met. The engagement to you was... I convinced myself I loved you, Delphine. Truly, I did. You were kind and intelligent, and everything society told me I shouldn't value. Choosing you felt like rebellion, like claiming something for myself, but I was fooling myself. I wasn't strong enough to withstand the pressure, the expectations. So you simply let me be destroyed. Delphine kept her voice level, but anger simmered beneath. You stood there in that taproom and watched Cordelia Blackwood eviscerate me, and you said nothing of substance in my defense. I know. Harrison's face crumpled with shame. I know, and I will regret that cowardice for the rest of my life. But Delphine, listen. I ended things with Cordelia 6 weeks ago. The engagement is off. I couldn't go through with it. Every time I looked at her, I saw you, saw what I'd lost. Mother is furious. Father is threatening to disinherit me, but I don't care. I need you to know that I finally found the courage I should have had from the beginning. Harrison, Delphine said quietly, you're telling me this as if you expect it to change something. It doesn't. You finding your spine months too late does nothing to repair what was broken. But we could try again, Harrison said desperately, reaching across the table for her hand. She pulled back before he could grasp it. I know I hurt you terribly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But Delphine, we could leave England, go somewhere my family's influence doesn't reach. Start over, properly this time, with me as the man I should have been all along. The tragedy, Delphine realized, was that 5 months ago, this speech would have meant everything to her. The man she loved, remorseful and reformed, offering her the fairy tale ending she'd craved. But now, listening to Harrison's plea, she felt only distant pity. Do you know what I've been doing since Christmas? She asked. I've learned to stitch wounds and deliver babies. I've sat up nights with patients, researched treatments, taught women to read so they could understand medical instructions. I've found work that matters, Harrison. Purpose beyond being decorative or well-bred. And I've found people who value me for my competence, not my pedigree or lack thereof. This doctor you're with, Harrison said, a sharp edge entering his voice. Sterling, is there something between you? That's none of your concern. But yes, since you ask, I've developed feelings for him. Real feelings based on mutual respect and shared values, not the romantic fantasy I mistook for love with you. Harrison's face darkened. You've been living unchaperoned with this man for months? Delphine, your reputation, my reputation, was destroyed by your family last Christmas, remember? And I live with his aunt, for your information, in perfect propriety. But even if I didn't, even if every scandalous rumor were true, it would still be none of your business. You relinquished any claim to concern about my choices when you chose Cordelia Blackwood over me. Oh, so that's it? Harrison's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. I bare my soul, admit my mistakes, offer you everything, and you reject me for some country doctor. Some country doctor who has achieved more genuine good in 1 year than your entire family has in generations, Delphine said crisply. Some country doctor who sees me as a partner, not a possession. Some country doctor who never once asked me to be less than I am to fit someone else's expectations. She stood gathering her reticule. I appreciate your honesty, Harrison. Truly. And I hope you find happiness, genuine happiness, with someone who suits you better than I ever did. But I am not that person anymore. The woman you knew, the one you were willing to marry, she died in that snowstorm. I'm someone else now, someone better. Delphine, please, goodbye, Harrison. I wish you well. She walked away without looking back, her heart pounding, but her conscience clear. In the hotel lobby, she found Benedict waiting, his expression anxious. How are you? He asked immediately. Free, Delphine said simply. Finally, completely free. Something in her tone, her expression, made Benedict's eyes widen. Before either could speak further, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. The Duchess of Thornfield swept in, Cordelia Blackwood at her side, both women radiating fury. There she is, Cordelia announced loudly, pointing at Delphine. The little adventuress who has been spreading lies about Harrison, trying to worm her way back into his good graces now that she's discovered he's vulnerable. The lobby fell silent, every eye turning to witness the confrontation. Delphine felt Benedict tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm, staying him. "Miss Blackwood," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the marble space, "I have spread no lies about anyone. Mr. Thornfield requested this meeting, not I. And if you're concerned about my interest in him, let me assure you I have none whatsoever. He is entirely yours, if you still want him." "As if we'd believe anything from your mouth," the Duchess spat. "You disappeared for months, obviously scheming, and now you reappear at precisely the moment Harrison has developed a conscience about how you were treated. It's transparently manipulative." "I disappeared," Delphine said coldly, "because your son lacked the courage to defend me from your cruelty and Miss Blackwood's public humiliation. I nearly died in a snowstorm that night, Your Grace. I was rescued by Dr. Sterling's family and given refuge when I had none. Since then, I have been working as a medical assistant, contributing to society in ways your family, for all its wealth and title, never has. I didn't scheme or plot or wait for Harrison to realize his mistake. I built a new life, and frankly, it's a far better life than any I would have had as part of your family. You dare speak to me this way, I dare speak truth to power, yes. Your Grace, you broke an engagement that should have been sacred, destroyed my reputation out of pure snobbery, and nearly caused my death through your machinations. And you did it all because I wasn't rich enough, wasn't titled enough, wasn't sufficiently ornamental for your standards. Well, I'm grateful now. You did me the greatest favor of my life by rejecting me." Benedict stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "I think Miss Ashford has made herself abundantly clear. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a train to catch. Good day, Your Grace, Miss Blackwood." He offered Delphine his arm, and they walked past the two stunned women with perfect dignity. Only when they reached the street and hailed a cab did Delphine allow herself to tremble, the enormity of the confrontation catching up with her. "I can't believe I said those things," she whispered. "To a duchess, in the Claridge lobby. It will be in every gossip column by morning." "Good," Benedict said fiercely. "Let them print it. Let everyone know exactly what the Thornfield family did and how magnificently you rose above it." He took her hand, his grip warm and grounding. "Delphine, you were extraordinary. Seeing you stand there facing down those terrible people with such courage and grace, I have never admired anyone more. I couldn't have done it without you," Delphine said softly, "without knowing I had somewhere safe to return to, someone who valued me for who I actually am." Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything unspoken between them crystallized. Benedict opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it. "Come," he said instead. "Let's go home, to Raven's Peak, where you belong." Home. Yes, Delphine thought as the cab carried them toward the station. Raven's Peak was home now in ways Thornfield Manor had never been, and Benedict. But she'd think about Benedict later. For now it was enough to leave London behind, to return to the mountains and the work and the life she had chosen for herself, the life she had earned. Summer arrived in Raven's Peak with a profusion of wildflowers that turned the mountain meadows into tapestries of colour. Delphine stood at the window of the surgery, recording the morning's patient list, and paused to admire the view. 6 months since the London trip, and she could barely remember the anxious woman she had been at the conference, worried about encountering her past. Her past no longer had power over her. The practice had flourished. Word of Benedict's work, amplified by his successful presentation and subsequent publication in a medical journal, had brought recognition and additional funding from charitable organizations. They had been able to expand the surgery, hire a part-time nurse, and establish a small lending library of medical texts for other rural practitioners. Delphine's role had grown beyond mere assistant. She now taught monthly classes for village women on hygiene, first aid, and maternal health. And Benedict had begun seriously discussing the possibility of her pursuing formal medical education. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson did it, he argued one evening over dinner at Meg's cottage. Against extraordinary odds, she became a licensed physician. You're every bit as capable, Delphine. You've earned the right to that title. It would mean leaving Raven's Peak, Delphine said softly, going to Edinburgh, or possibly abroad. Years of study. I know. Benedict's gaze was steady, intent. But I'd wait. However long it took, I'd wait for you. The conversation had ended there, both of them dancing around the deeper question that lay beneath the practical considerations. But the tension between them had grown increasingly difficult to ignore. They worked side by side daily, their partnership seamless and intuitive. They shared meals, books, ideas, hopes, and yet neither had acknowledged aloud what everyone else in Raven's Peak had long since noticed. They were in love. Meg had stopped being subtle about it weeks ago. For heaven's sake, she'd said just last night, you're both brilliant people making yourselves miserable out of some misguided sense of propriety. Benedict thinks you need more time to heal from Harrison. You think he's too honorable to want someone with your ruined reputation. It's exhausting to watch. Perhaps that was why, when Benedict appeared in the surgery doorway that afternoon with unusual nervousness in his expression, Delphine felt her heart begin to race. Do you have a moment? He asked. I thought we might take a walk. It's too beautiful to stay indoors. They climbed the path behind the village, up into the high meadows where the air was thin and sweet with the scent of heather. Neither spoke, content to simply move together through the summer afternoon. Finally, they reached a spot Benedict had shown her months ago, a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the entire valley, mountains rising like cathedral spires in every direction. I need to tell you something, Benedict said, turning to face her, and I've been a coward about it for far too long. Delphine's breath caught. All right, I'm in love with you. But the words tumbled out, unpolished but utterly sincere. I have been for months, possibly from the moment you woke up in Aunt Meg's guest room and immediately asked if you could help rather than accepting rest. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever known, Delphine. Your intelligence, your compassion, your courage, they humble me daily. And I know you've been through hell, that maybe you're not ready for this, but I had to tell you. Because I can't keep pretending what I feel is merely professional respect or friendly affection. For a moment, Delphine could only stare at him, joy flooding through her with such intensity it was almost painful. Then she laughed, a sound of pure relief. Benedict Sterling, you absolute fool. I've been in love with you since London, possibly longer. I was waiting for you to say something first because I thought maybe you saw me as damaged goods, or that you were too honorable to pursue someone you'd rescued. She didn't get to finish the sentence. Benedict closed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her, his hands cradling her face with infinite gentleness. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, the taste of him, the warmth of his body against hers, the rightness of it all. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Benedict rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he whispered. Not because it's expected or proper or advantageous. Marry me because we choose each other, because we're partners in everything that matters. Marry me and then go to Edinburgh if you want, study medicine, become Dr. Ashford. I'll manage the practice here and visit whenever I can, and when you're finished, we'll decide together where we go next. Just marry me, Delphine. Choose this life, this path with me. Yes, Delphine said, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, absolutely yes. They stood there on the mountainside, holding each other as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. This was nothing like the fairy tale Delphine had once imagined. There would be no grand estate, no glittering ballrooms, no title or vast fortune. Instead, there would be work and purpose and genuine partnership. There would be challenges and sacrifice and the constant striving to make a real difference in people's lives. It would be better than any fairy tale. News of their engagement spread through Raven's Peak with the speed and enthusiasm typical of small communities. The village threw them an impromptu celebration, where even the gruffest miners showed up with well wishes and awkwardly earnest congratulations. Meg wept openly, then immediately began planning a wedding that would be, in her words, properly joyous, not some stuffy society performance. They married in August, in the small stone church overlooking the valley. Delphine wore a simple gown of cream lace that Meg had helped her sew, and carried wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadows. Benedict wore his best suit and looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in existence. There was no orchestra, no champagne fountain, no visiting dignitaries, just the people of Ravens Peak, who had accepted her without question and celebrated her happiness with genuine warmth. As they exchanged vows, Delphine thought briefly of the Christmas Eve when she had walked into a blizzard, believing her life was over. How wrong she had been, how impossibly, wonderfully wrong. That autumn, Delphine began her medical studies at the Edinburgh School of Medicine for Women, one of only 17 women in her class. The coursework was brutal, the prejudice from male colleagues exhausting, but she attacked it with the same determination she had brought to everything since leaving Thornfield. Benedict wrote her long letters full of practice news and encouragement, visited monthly when he could spare the time, and never once suggested she should give up or settle for less than her ambitions. During her rare visits back to Ravens Peak, she fell into the old rhythms with ease, assisting with surgeries, teaching her women's health classes, discussing complex cases with Benedict over dinner. The separation was difficult, but it was also temporary, and the knowledge that they were building toward a shared future made it bearable. In her second year of study, a letter arrived from an unexpected source. Harrison Thornfield, writing to inform her that he had married a Scottish gentlewoman, the daughter of a professor, and had taken a position managing his family's northern estates. The letter was brief but sincere, wishing her happiness and acknowledging finally that they had both been ill-suited for the roles society had tried to assign them. "He's finally growing up," Meg commented when Delphine shared the news. "Better late than never, I suppose." "I hope he's happy," Delphine said, and meant it. Harrison had been weak, not evil, and his weakness had inadvertently freed her to find her true path. Cordelia Blackwood, according to the society pages, had married a wealthy American industrialist and moved to New York. The Duchess of Thornfield had reportedly suffered a series of small strokes, leaving her power diminished and her son increasingly independent. The entire Thornfield drama had faded into memory, relevant to Delphine's life only as the catalyst that had brought her here. 3 years after that Christmas Eve blizzard, Delphine completed her medical degree with honors. Benedict traveled to Edinburgh for the graduation, and she spotted him immediately in the crowd, his face alight with pride. When they called Dr. Delphine Sterling, she walked across that stage knowing she had earned every syllable of the title. They returned to Ravens Peak together, ready to run the practice as equals. Dr. Benedict Sterling and Dr. Delphine Sterling, partners in medicine and life. The people of the village welcomed her back with a celebration that lasted 3 days, genuinely excited to have 2 doctors for the price of 1. As old Tom Hastings put it. One evening, a year into their partnership practice, Delphine and Benedict sat on the porch of the cottage they had built together, larger than Meg's, designed specifically to accommodate both a home and an expanded surgery. The summer sunset painted the mountains in shades of amber and violet, and Delphine leaned against her husband's shoulder with deep contentment. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Harrison had been braver?" Benedict asked idly, playing with her fingers. "If he'd stood up to his family and married you?" Delphine considered the question seriously. "I'd be Lady Delphine Thornfield, living in a gilded cage, hosting dinner parties and producing heirs. I'd have security and status and absolutely no purpose beyond ornamental duty. I'd probably have convinced myself I was happy, because women are trained to make the best of whatever life we're given. But Benedict..." She turned to look at him directly. "I wouldn't have this. This work, this partnership, this genuine chosen happiness. So no, I don't wonder. I'm grateful every single day that Harrison was a coward. His weakness gave me the chance to discover my own strength. You would have found it eventually, Benedict said softly. You're too remarkable to stay hidden forever. Maybe, but I found it here, with you, in these mountains. That matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight so many winters ago. Delphine thought about that younger version of herself, terrified, humiliated, certain she had lost everything. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was coming. The pain would fade, the shame would dissolve, and from the wreckage would emerge something far more valuable than any aristocratic marriage. A life of purpose, a love built on respect and partnership, the freedom to define her own worth. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for giving me space to become who I needed to be, for choosing me, choosing this, choosing us. Benedict kissed her temple. Always, he promised. In every life, in every version of this story, I choose you. And as the mountain night settled around them, Delphine knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice too. She had bloomed exactly where she was planted, not in the carefully cultivated gardens of society, but in the wild, honest earth of a life she had built with her own hands. And she had never been happier. Thank you for listening to Delphine and Benedict's story. If you enjoyed this tale of second chances and finding your true path, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more emotional historical dramas. And don't forget to leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. What did you think of Delphine's journey from the Duke's Manor to the mountain hideaway? Would you have made the same choices? Share your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next story.